Order? Yeah, wide face. All right, so let's get this started. Welcome everybody to Breaking Polarity episode 1. Today we're going to be talking with my friend Ben about beliefs on Christianity, and then we'll have a chance to ask him some questions. He may have some time to ask me some questions. And the goal of this podcast is just for both of us to not necessarily convert the other person to our beliefs, but just understand where the other person is coming from. So, Ben, if you want to introduce yourself or say anything, this is your chance.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Um, Really like nothing right off the bat, I guess. Just happy to be here.
All right. Well, if you want, you can plug your Twitter at the end. I don't know if you want random
Okay,
people following you, but.
I don't know, but I don't know, maybe. We'll see.
Okay. Okay,
I'll
so
plug my Venmo. No, I'm just kidding.
so the first thing that I wanted to ask you is just about your general overview of your religious beliefs. So if you could just give like a quick summary of like what you believe and maybe like it doesn't have to be quick, it can be however long you want. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm a Christian and I believe in God, and I believe that uh, Jesus is the Son of God. Um, Jesus died as a man for our sins, and because of that, we're able to go to heaven in the afterlife.
Okay. So do you practice like a specific uh what are they called? Denomination of Christianity? Or is it more of a personal thing? Or how official?
hmm well, I'm definitely official. I would say being a Methodist, but we kind of moved because the church I used to go to as a kid closed because they went bankrupt. Um, and then we kind of moved away from Methodist church, and then we started going to a non-denominational church. I would say currently non-denominational. Um, yeah, that's
Okay.
that's pretty much that.
So could you explain what that actually means? What does non-denominational mean? I know that some people have.
hmm so in my opinion, church denominations, um, they're it's really just a lot of small details, in my opinion. Now, I'm not familiar with a large number of them, and at least like the intricacies of several denominations. Um, like a lot of like the some of the main differences are that really you have like Catholicism, which is kind of like I guess you could say like the OG. Um, they're kind of the older, more traditional denominations. They have the sacraments and they have all of the miracles that they believe in, and those are like kind of an integral part of the church. And to me, I totally like respect that, but I don't necessarily like that's just not like an integral part of church. Like um, I don't know. I would just say for non-denominational, it's just kind of I think like each non-denominational church kind of does their own thing, and some are good, some are not my favorite, but it really, in my opinion, I don't think denomination plays a huge role beyond a more traditional style like service and community versus a more modern style community.
When you say modern, what do you mean by that?
Um, Primarily, I don't want to use the term like liberal because I'm not sure if that's the correct terminology to use. But you kind of see like, especially on campus, there's a lot of like modern style churches where you don't really get the hymn book anymore. You're kind of doing like the Christian rock thing, um, which is cool. I'm down with that. And then you kind of get like the younger pastors and kind of the younger messages. I think they do tend to be more like left leaning, sort of in a way. Maybe that's looking at it with too critically an eye, but you can kind of like it doesn't really conform to like the traditional church.
Okay.
Um, Beyond, I mean, and like I said, it's really just with kind of like small not super significant things. Like in most churches on campus, like we're not going to do communion, where you eat bread and then drink wine. Whereas in like a Lutheran church, you might do that once a month or even like every time you go.
Okay.
It's just small. It's just kind of like small things like that.
Okay, so one
But
of my sorry, go ahead.
you're good. No, go ahead.
Okay, so one of my questions was actually about like modernization of the church. And so we've
Hmm.
seen over the past that we have like, for example, some denominations are moving away from the idea that like being homosexual is inherently wrong, or like they just
Hmm.
change some things about the church. So not necessarily on that issue in and of itself, but how do you feel about the modernization of religion to conform to beliefs of today? Think that that's a problem, or do you accept that as a part of the evolution of the religion?
That's a tough question.
And this can
And
this can totally be like case by case basis as well. Like you don't have, yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah,
And I will, a precursor to this is that, um, I'm not God. I don't know the right answers to some of these questions. And um, I'm not like super knowledgeable, I guess you could say. Um, I have like sort of my own opinions, but I'm not speaking for everybody by any means. Um, I would say that absolutely there's like a huge like hmm. I don't know. I totally see what you mean by how like the church is adapting to like modern society, especially with the rising um cultural individualism that we kind of see within like the past 10 years or so. Um and to me, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. Um because like I do believe that God loves everyone no matter who you are or what you do. Um but also I don't know that I would go as far as to say that culture um, is can override like what the Bible says. Because I believe that the Bible is the Word of God, and that's what's true to me. And yes, like, and with like rising individualism, there's a lot of things these days that are considered against the Word, but kind of like culturally accepted. And I would probably take the stance that um, I don't think. Yeah, it's hard to say. I'm not sure if if because a culture accepts something, does it mean that it's okay? I would probably say no, because I still think that the universal like laws for the church are outlined in the Bible,
okay,
and I know that there's also like a lot of gray areas and you know um, kind of difficult things to understand about the word. So, like I said, I'm not really super well versed to be able to like go in depth about any of that. But I would say God loves everybody, but also, there are rules that I think are still applicable to modern day society and should be applicable to the end time.
okay, sure. So yeah, one of the arguments that I've heard is that the reason, so like atheists try to use, why I ask this is some atheists try to use evolution of religion as some sort of knock against it, as like this discredits. I personally don't feel that. I think that the evolution of religion is something that's going to happen. As even if, okay, let's say we could take this as like a scientific thing, which obviously it's not, but even if you could have it be a scientific thing, you're going to have new information. Okay? So maybe God would talk to people um, as time goes on, and then different interpretations of his messages could manifest themselves in different. So I personally think that I think your answer to that was really like, yes, we can have some sort of evolution, but at the same time we have to. I think what you were trying to get at was, for the evolution to happen, we have to make sure that it's not just like cultural pressure and it actually does conform. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I would say. And
Okay.
like, sure, maybe God decides, hey, I'm gonna do something new. but I don't see any evidence of that happening. I
But
guess I'm sure that could happen if God was like, we're gonna write Bible too. Then all right. But also the other issue with that is like, um, I it would be hard for a lot of people to kind of believe that, especially these days.
so
So I would say I don't
okay.
know.
Okay, so when we talk about the Bible, this is something that's always kind of to me. Okay, so
Okay.
inherently how I view it, and feel free to correct me wherever you think I'm wrong. How I view it is the Bible is, in a sense, the Word of God. However, it was written by so how
Hmm.
I've always so like I said, if you don't think this, feel free. This is my interpretation of how I was exposed to the religion. Is like um God sent messages to these people, disseminated the messages, but in a sense there's almost like an interpretation going through the Bible. Um so I'm interested to hear what you think about it.
So yes, I mean the Bible was definitely written by humans. That's true. That's a fact. And I've also thought about this a lot because there are just recently I was thinking about this because I've been looking for like a version of the Bible for me to read. And if you're not aware, there are like probably over a
Tons.
hundred. There are like over 100 different versions of the English Bible that all say something different.
Yeah.
And I was, it's easy to say like, oh, King James version, which is an older version, sound, like it has more Old English and it's definitely older, so maybe that means it's more authentic. It can also make it more difficult to read. So I'm kind of looking at other ones that are maybe a little bit more modernized, I guess you could say. Um, that I don't know, but I definitely agree. I think, I mean, there has to be some interpretation. Um, Obviously, like quotes from Jesus, I would say are probably 100% authentic. Um, for the rest of it, I would I would trust its validity, um, because I don't know. I would trust its validity because I mean God's all powerful, and I think if he's all powerful, he's gonna get what he wants
Okay.
written in the book.
That makes
And
sense.
it's that is something interesting though. The original, I mean, I guess a lot of like modern interpretations are also because of like the translation from Hebrew. Um, but I don't know. I think there's definitely some amount of interpretation, but I imagine it's rather minuscule, or at least in like less important parts,
Okay.
I guess.
So this is kind of this lead. Could you? How did you actually come to your beliefs? This, I think, would uh, affect how I would interpret what you just said. So if you could
Okay.
explain how you came to your belief, like when I asked you like what your religious beliefs are, um, so like those two questions kind of together. So like let me try and explain a little bit what I'm trying to get at. So like let's say I believed in God. There are, I think, there are two things that I can think of right now of a way to have a faith. You can have a view of what you think the God would be and then interpret the Bible, or you could have the Bible which makes what you think God would be. So I think that depending on how you came to faith, that might change. I know personally I've found some people who were very not religious before, and then like they prayed for something to happen, it happened, and then they became very Christian. So if you could just like kind of go into detail on that, and then we can get to the other stuff.
Okay. And yeah, that's probably what I would say is that um I think the Bible can be very hard to interpret at times. And maybe it's because I'm not the most intelligent, or I'm not, or I don't have the tools to understand it. But I definitely would say that, like, coming to religion, like, from reading the Bible alone is probably not the way that it's intended to be. Um, a lot of Christians will refer to their Bible as their sword, and you have to know how to use a sword. I guess I don't know if that's a good analogy, but
Actually,
kind of what
never
I'm getting
I've
at.
never heard that before. That's interesting.
Yeah, um, yeah. We refer to the Bible as a sword sometimes. So I think the best way to come into religion is to have a personal experience with God, and then the Bible is how you learn more and kind of get into it. Personally, now I don't have like a crazy testimony or anything. I was kind of just born and raised as a Christian from my family, and I know that's how a lot of Christians were born and raised. But I think my what kind of like solidifies my faith is that as I grew up and I became, curious about the world and about the universe, and more questionative, I kind of realized now that I think there's definitely um, some kind of greater being out there, because I just personally, I mean, I can understand the fact that a lot of people think, stuff happens by chance, but to me that just never really rung with me, I guess. Um, it just makes a lot more sense that the world was created to me, because I really see a lot of beauty in the world, especially in such a broken world these days. Um, it can definitely be, I don't know.
Well,
But
let me help you
yeah,
out. What do you mean by
okay.
broken world? Yeah.
I think I don't know. Just like my kind of view of the world is that there's always like, especially these days, a lot of people will say that. I mean, just think about like stuff you see in the news these days. Um, things like homosexuality and rape and abortion are just like flooding the news. Um, you know, especially with like the rise of like individualism and people saying, I'm not a boy or a girl, which I don't even want to get into right now, but stuff like that. There's just always some kind of problem going on. I don't necessarily know when the last time the world was like quote unquote at peace. And to me, I think that that kind of comes from us, like mankind. And but at the same time, the world is a magnificent place. You can find beauty in things as vast as the Grand Canyon and as small as like a couple atoms. And to me, I just don't think that happens by chance. So that's kind of where I started like thinking, hey, there's probably a God. Um, and then that's kind of just where my faith spurs from, I guess, is that to me, I think especially when you get to like unanswered questions, which we can talk about later. I think that I think that we probably won't ever have an answer to every question. Um, and to me, knowing that there are always answers to questions, those answers are going to be God. So I guess that's kind of like a brief um, Frankenstein response to kind of where I get my faith, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay. I understand the beauty part. The
Hmm.
so if we're talking about, I think I'm trying to think of what if I want to take this conversation into this region with the whole broken world idea.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to think of something. How, okay. So would you think that more people, um, do you think that people aren't practicing Christian beliefs or values, or do you think that those people might be thinking that they're practicing? What do you think exactly is the problem that say could be solved by religion in that sense?
In the world?
Yeah.
Uh, oh, okay. um, that's a big question. So I think that I mean, of course, there are good people out there. There are people that are Christians. There are practicing Christians. I think there's a lot of people that claim to be Christian, but they kind of are the "I'm Christian" on December 25th Christians and on Easter, and then then they go about their own way the rest of the year. And I don't, I'm not judging anybody by saying this, but I know a few people that are like that myself. And it's good to say that you're Christian, but I think walking in the faith um, really changes who you are. I know two good friends of mine that like it's just I don't know, they just act like you can just tell they act differently because they actively pursue Jesus every day. And it's just really interesting. Just like watching them put their trust in God, and things always seem to work out for them, which is really impressive to me. Whereas I don't really see that in people who necessarily don't believe, or maybe believe, but they're going to do their own thing for a while and worry about Christianity later because they're young or whatever. Um, I just see different stuff in people that do it, and I kind of aspire to be like that.
Okay, so what would you say are, could you pinpoint any values of these people that they hold, or is it something more, I guess the word would be ethereal that they're doing? Is it a specific value that they're looking at, or are they kind of just something that's not necessarily like um easy to put into words, I guess would be the really
Hmm.
Frankenstein point of that. Yeah.
it's it can be hard to put into words. Um, just I guess sort of the best way to see it is just kind of like they just kind of like they just kind of orate love and kindness. Um, I don't think I've ever now I won't say they don't sin, but because of course we all do, but I think it's just kind of like an aura that they project that I just don't really see with other people, and it's just kind of fascinating. Um, even a, it's hard to say. It is kind of ethereal. It is hard to put into words.
Okay. So,
I'll think about that a little bit.
okay.
Um,
All right.
but
So,
yeah.
what I just heard um
Hmm.
is that in order for people to say qualify this as better lives, I
Sure.
think, yeah, I think you and I would agree that if people were living better lives, and we wouldn't have um there wouldn't be so much like strife, I guess. So in order for people to live better lives, your opinion is that they don't necessarily have to, I guess, is it about hmm. So what I was trying to get at with the denomination thing earlier is like the different denominations have very, you were saying, have very different like ideas of how to worship God, right? So the
Yeah, that's a
one,
good way to put it.
yeah, the one common theme, all of them, idea of like, I guess like what you said earlier, loving God and trusting God. So would you, do you think that those two primary things, or are there also some like, I guess, periphery um kind of action that you think would, like, ought to have in order to um I don't want to make this sound really gatekeeping, but I don't know like how else to phrase this, of like to
Hmm.
be a good Christian.
No,
um
I definitely understand what you're saying. Um, and I would say that the primary is to have a relationship with God. That's the most important thing. To believe in your heart that Jesus is the Son of God and died for our sins, and has paid the debt. of our lives. So that would be definitely be the most important thing. And I think the second most important thing is to have relationships with other people. Um, I think that God calls us as Christians to not just reach out to Him, but to also reach out to each other. Um, One thing I've kind of been learning is that it makes it not only a lot easier to walk in the faith with a group, um, but also, I guess, like more enjoyable because you definitely get a lot of benefits from that, including, um, being able to talk to each other and pray for each other and hold each other accountable. I think it's definitely a good thing to have community. And that's also kind of like why the church is important too, because you don't need to go to church to be a Christian. Um, you can, all you really, all you need to be a Christian, like I said, is to believe in God and have a relationship with Him. But I think church offers the same kind of like benefits. It's a place to gather and worship the Lord, and then also learn about how to live a life like Jesus, which is kind of the third sort of idea. As Christians, we strive to live like Jesus, which is kind of ironic because we know we can never be perfect. Um, Yet we try anyways. That's kind of our calling, though. So by living like Jesus, I don't necessarily know if that's a requirement to be a good Christian, um, but I think that's kind of like a general aspiration of most Christians would say, you know, I'm called to try to live like Jesus. Um, yeah. So I would say those are probably three important things. Now, what is required is absolutely the first thing. The second and third stuff I think are just kind of like good steps to take to sort of bolster your ability to have a relationship with God. But I wouldn't say that they're necessary.
The third would be the community aspect. Was that the third thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Uh
Okay.
huh.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. I think the community aspect, that's one place that we can definitely find common ground on. I think communities are absolutely vital, and um
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think that if you don't have a community, then unless you really really have the motivation, and even if you do have the motivation, drive, and love for it, it's still hard to keep if you don't have
Hmm.
anybody there to um not even necessarily like the negative I guess the negative positives of it, of like have somebody there to keep you accountable and all that, like that's kind of like a positive that affects a negative, but also like the things that are just always positive, so like having fun with your friends. That's
Hmm.
not like a community isn't helping you out of something negative, it's just inherently giving you something positive. So
Hmm.
I definitely agree that the community aspect of um, faith, while I don't think it's inherent or required for faith, I think that it's a byproduct of people um, that want to practice. And I think that the community aspect is actually like, if there's one thing that I really really like about religions, it's that community. I think a lot of people have a hard time finding in their daily lives. I think really way to kind of find a community like-minded and like experience something together.
Hmm.
Okay, so relationship with God. I guess we're actually no. We're what we're gonna jump back to is you said that your personal belief for why you believe in God is because of beauty of the world, and that that sort of beauty wouldn't have just like not been, I guess. That was
Sure. Yeah.
okay. So this is actually a topic that I wanted to talk about. I know that you said you wanted to talk about this when um, we first started talking about doing this podcast, but there's this idea that science and religion have to clash, and some
Mm-hmm.
atheists will say things like, well, religion is obviously fake because look at the beauty of science, or something like that. So if you just want to like lay your take out there of what you think about that, and then we can,
Yeah, so I think, I mean, as a fellow scientist, um,
I wouldn't
I
call
would,
us scientists.
okay, engineer.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that while some things may contradict, um, the idea that they're mutually exclusive, I think is not. I don't believe that at all. Um, because obviously there's lots of scientific topics that have been proven to be true, and at the same time, I mean, a lot of people will talk about like the like origins, right? Like where did the universe come from? And that's like one of the major topics that are debated between science and religion. And like to me, I can totally see a place where there's both, right? Like in the first, especially if you go into the Bible, which let me see if I can pull up, right? Like literally in the first sentence of the Bible is in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And then and it talks like a little bit about it, right? That's that's it. Like what does that mean? I mean, do people think it's sure, maybe that means he created the universe like it was 2000 years ago and there was no big bang. Or, I mean, I don't understand how I would think, you know, that there's a lot of leeway in that line, especially when you think about you have to remember that when this scripture was written, people didn't know about, you know, the four fundamental forces. They didn't really like science wasn't really a thing at that point. Um, I don't even know if like basic understanding. I'd have to look at the years. I like when exactly people like Galileo were around town and whatnot. Like I don't even think people knew that like the Earth orbited around the sun, right? And
Right.
that's pretty much universally agreed upon. Um, so I would say that you can totally combine them in a really easy way. When God created the heaven and the earth, that who says that's not the Big Bang, right? And then a lot of people will say, oh well, in Genesis 1, which is the first book of the Bible, um, he says like on the first day God created the heaven and the earth, and then on the second day he did this. But like, I think that's also kind of stupid because you know I don't know how long a God day is versus a human day, and
Right.
obviously the Big Bang took longer than a human day, but that could just be it could have just been denoted as a day. I don't know what that means. So I think a lot of people kind of get this idea of like they kind of just maybe take it too literally, or I mean, maybe I'm taking it too loosely. But I can totally see, like, for example, when later on it says, God created man, um, and from the rib of a man, God created woman. And I won't get into details on how that works because I really don't know. But I mean, I could see how that, by God creating man, that could be like some sort of evolutionary process. I totally and of course, like I said, maybe I just don't know enough about what the scripture says, or maybe I don't know enough about the scientific topics. But from my perspective, which I think would be pretty akin to like the average Christian's perspective, I can totally see an agreement between those two on a large number of those topics. I'm sure there are some things that don't necessarily um, align very well. But to me, like those two really are really the big topics between science and religion. I can totally see a scenario in which that they are pretty much, one and the same. I guess you could say.
Right. So I think um, I'm trying to like parse what you say because
Yeah,
I think I largely agree with it, like everything you say. So I'm trying not to like say something that we probably both agree on, but you haven't said yet. So
yeah, you're good.
um, let's say So I guess science versus religion contradiction. Okay, so you already mentioned like evolution, but I guess from what you just said, would you be a creationist or would you not? Like, I guess the whole Earth was made, what is it, 6,000 years ago? Are you on that train, or do you think that's a contradiction that you reject from science, or is that something that the interpretation of the Bible is wrong, or yeah, something like that? Like, where are you with like any issue that you can think of? Where do you think you are? Do you like totally accept all the scientific evidence and then say, oh well, God made it that way, or are there some things that you think the Bible has wrong and maybe science has, or the Bible has correct and maybe science has?
Yeah, so I would trust the Bible probably is my first priority. And I would say that I just think, I mean, especially thinking about like when the Bible was written at that period of time, um, if the Bible was written in modern day, maybe it might have said something like, God made the Big Bang and whatnot. So I would say that I just lost my thought. Wow. Okay. Um, I think I don't know. I would say that largely, um, they can both be the same. I wouldn't say I'm a creationist or an evolutionist because those are kind of polarizing filters. Um, when people think creationist, they think they're 6,000 years old. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I would say I absolutely think God created this universe and this world, and He created everything in it. Um, but the processes um, in which He used to create those things, I don't really know. And I would say that science probably points towards those processes because, um, I mean, that's what we've observed. So that's probably my stance on it.
Okay, yeah, like I said, your stance and my stance align like almost perfectly.
Awesome.
I think the people that, I mean, obviously I don't agree with like the I don't have the same, I don't even want to say I disagree with it. I just don't have the same faith, but the idea that science can somehow disprove, I think, is the most like asinine idea ever have. Because how is something that you're going to measure and observe going to disprove something that you can't measure? Um,
Yeah.
and then again, the how I rationalize this is again what I said earlier of like the Bible was written by humans, and maybe the interpretation of those humans was different, or maybe um like different from today, or different from what God's interpret the words meant. So, and maybe who knows? So like I think the idea that you disprove religion is an incredibly slippery slope that
Yeah.
you should not be on with when it comes to science.
I
Okay,
mean, religion is the purpose of religion is to answer questions we can't answer.
correct.
So how can you answer a question we can't answer? You can't.
Yeah.
So I agree with that.
Okay. So how would you describe like your actual, so you said that God is all loving, so like could you lay out kind of what that means? Like is God a activist in the sense of lots of activity, or pacifist in the sense of like a clockmaker theory, or like
uh,
just set it up and said all right go? Where would you fall in that spectrum?
so a lot of people, well, I don't know. I believe that God is very active. That yeah, the clockmaker analogy is where you know he designed the watch and then he started the watch and the watch takes on its own and he doesn't intervene. I don't believe that at all because um, if God's not a part of this world, then how does he answer prayer? Um, that's kind of like a pretty easy reason for me to kind of disagree with that. So I think God plays an integral role um, in our lives. through prayer, of course, um, through conscience and our morals, um, and really everything, I guess.
Do you believe that said morals? Do you believe that in order to have a uh, societally accepted morally moral person, do you think that you need to have some sort of in a religion, or do you think that we can kind of come up with these morals without some sort of
Yeah, so I've actually so I've been watching some YouTube. There's a nice YouTube channel guy who like goes out and kind of like there's a couple guys that'll go out on campuses and talk about stuff like this, and kind of what the consensus is that the underlying so everybody has morals, but those I would say without some kind of underlying law of moral law, then you can't really justify the morals because let's say there is no let's say think for a sec, maybe there's no god, there's no religion, take that out of this out take that out of what we're doing, then how do you answer the question, where do your morals come from?
do
Because
you want me to actually answer this, or is this
sure,
rhetorical?
go ahead.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
how I would answer this is that a lot of my morals come from um, kind of, they probably do have roots in Christianity, is where I probably got a lot of my morals. Um, However, I think that how I analyze morality is very independent of um, some sort of higher power or um, other like framework. I think that the principles, I have certain principles that are kind of the guiding factor of what I think is moral or immoral. And so like one of these principles is in Christianity as well. However, I think that you could arrive to it outside of Christianity is like the whole golden rule. So like I don't want to do something to somebody else that I wouldn't want done to me. However, the reason for that is not necessarily um could you explain before I even say this? I don't want to like implant a bad thought. Why do you think why do you think that moral exists in Christianity? What is like the actual I guess driving force behind why Christians believe in the golden
Because God wrote it on a stone. And it's one of the 10, I believe that's one of the 10 commandments: do unto others as they would do unto you. Maybe it's not a commandment, but that's somewhere in the Bible.
So okay,
Um,
well,
so,
but why would God
okay.
want that? Yeah, why would God want that? Is what I'm trying to get at. Like, um, yeah,
Hmm. I would say that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know why God would want us to be loving or otherwise. That's just what He's told us to do. I think that in the root of it, the reason God wants us to be loving is because um, in order to go to heaven, we have to have a relationship with Him, and that requires love. Um, so why does God tell us to not sin? Only because, and, why does God tell us to do good, um, and to love instead of hate? I would say that's just how it works.
okay. What I
I don't
would
know.
say, my interpretation of it, and then again, I could. This is not what you said at all, but so my interpretation of that would be how I've always viewed the golden rule of the Bible. God loves everybody in the world. Therefore, why would he want one of the people that he loves to do something bad to another person? So it's almost like a guiding principle of um, you should not be doing things to your brothers and sisters. You should have this love for each other, and if you don't have this love for each other, then that I guess carries the whole negative consequences of in order to get into heaven, you need to love thy neighbor and all that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. So coming back to my so I personally guess it's a kind of selfish view. Um I've listened to a lot of arguments and people talking about this. Me personally, how the golden rule works for me is in general, I would like to not necessarily like maximize my good experience. That implies that I may do it at the expense of others, but like I would want to do good to others because I think that if I don't do good to others, then well, if I'm bad toward um then I would receive negative feedback, and that would be unwanted. So like if I gossip about Becky, then Becky might gossip about me, and then people might not like me, and then it would not be enjoyable. Maybe if more people like Becky, then I'll get bullied, and then I will not have a happy life, right? So that's kind of where my view of the golden rule comes from. It's not necessarily like I just think that I should inherently do others. I think that there's a value to doing good for others that can manifest itself in many different ways. So, like, again, let's say if I had to choose between doing good and maybe doing a neutral act, I would choose one of those two. I wouldn't want to do some bad act because that bad act could potentially negatively. And I would say that my reasoning for not doing the bad act would be like maybe in the moment I think that I could say get away with it, but I'm uh, I guess I'm just a dumb human, and so a lot of the things that I think now, I don't think in the future. So like I've had a lot of view changes in the past like 5 years as I've grown up, and so like my views 5 years ago are nothing like my views today. So I think that that influenced my whole like, okay, I shouldn't do this negative act because it probably will get back to me. Certainly, especially because most of the actions that we do are with people in our immediate surroundings, and so I mean, like, not like you can just do it and run away. And even if you could, um, the book Crime and Punishment is one of my favorite books, because the whole um, analogy scenario that people point to say something like this is like, oh, well, then would you kill somebody if you could get away with it? And I would say that no, because even though you may get away with it in a societal sense, there is another moral um, that kind of goes into that of like, well, if you could kill somebody, first of all, if you could kill somebody and get away with it, then maybe somebody you they could get away. That would suck. So I don't want that to happen. So that's like the selfish reason, and then the other reason is like um, idea of doing something as that's like not necessary, um, that causes that big of a change in the world seems very bad to me. Because like the whole I don't want to play God type of thing.
What if it's a change for the better?
So the killing for good, like the utilitarian killing thing, I think you can justify that. That goes along with the whole I want to live in a life that's better for me, and if other people are living a life that's better for them, then I will almost certainly in turn also live a better life as long as the most amount of people, as long as it's not some like weird power structure. But if you distribute like happiness equally among everybody in a generally equal sense, if most people are happy, then that will probably produce a society that um, kind of feeds off that. So I would say,
Okay.
like, let's say Hitler. Okay, Hitler was killing a bunch of people. He was making a lot of people sad, and there are also very negative consequences related. So, like, what if what if Hitler were to take over all of Europe, all of Russia, and then invade the United States and enslave me for being like a Middle East? Um, then yeah, I would say it is in my interest and the interest of most people to yeah kill that person. But it's a fine line that's very hard to. I mean, obviously that example I think is pretty evident, but I think as you more and more towards like boundary, it gets blurry.
Okay, so I want to move away from the whole killing Hitler thing,
Yeah,
but
yeah, sure.
I want to add something you said earlier. Is that you kind of, if I'm kind of understanding what you're saying, is that are you saying that your morals are based off of what to get the most amount of happiness for you, or to get the most amount of happiness for the most amount of people?
So it's in a sense both. I think that if other people, if everybody around me is happy, and happy with the things that I'm doing, then I think that that will make me happy personally because I do have some Christian beliefs, and I think that influences this part of it. Of like, if I'm making other people happy, that makes me feel good inside. I feel good. I think the happiest I've ever been is when I'm helping other people. So like when I'm tutoring people or I'm explaining something to people. Like whenever people ask me for help, I love that. Because I like I like helping people because for me it felt like I didn't have many people help me. So I personally really like helping other people. Oh well, I didn't really have a bunch of people to help me. So um, I can kind of share what I've learned. And obviously, like that's probably really, really that view of the world, or that view of my life is probably horribly incorrect. I probably had plenty of people, but that's just how I feel currently. I'd have to think about that more. That's not something I've thought about like a lot. But let's say um, this is an interesting question because it's like, would I give money to a homeless person? Um, and I think answer to that is yes, because even though I don't necessarily see positive benefit that causes, I think that there's some sort of measurable benefit that action does.
Okay.
So
So,
it's a roundabout thing of like helping other people eventually helps. Right?
well, you giving money to a homeless person is not going to benefit you.
Well,
You
I
may
think
feel good. The only benefit you get is that you feel good about it. But in reality, you're losing money,
correct,
um,
but
which would generally be considered a negative.
well, if you think about just the number that you have, yes, that would be a negative. However, if I give a homeless person $5 and I'm making, let's say, $200,000, like I'm not going to feel that negative at all, and that happiness that I get knowing that I may have helped that person, they can like maybe now they have enough money to go afford a meal. I think the happiness that I get there is a measurable effect, and I also think that um, the happiness. Let's say that everybody did that, and then there were no homeless people. Let's say we just fixed the homelessness problem um,
Hmm.
through certain actions. Then I think that would also be a very measurable way that could affect my happiness because if there are no homeless people, that means that there's more economic growth because people are they have jobs and they're doing things and they have money to spend. So that can also be a benefit. Also, I don't have to like see. This sounds really bad, but I don't have to see the homeless people and go like what the fuck, bro? Like why are we doing this? Like it's like no, it's really sad. It's like when you see
Yeah.
like a homeless person like laying on the ground in like four layers of clothing that look like they bought it like 10 years ago, and it's like dead of winter, below zero. It's like it's really sad. So like I think that if we were to fix that problem, then that just I guess it's a really bad way to phrase it, but like just not seeing the homeless people would a good thing. Um, because then seeing it almost reminds you that it's an issue, and then it's not. It makes it real. It's not just something that you like think about every night.
So, kind of like tying this back to like your morals.
Yeah,
To me, what I'm picking up is that you like to help other people because by making other people happy, it makes you happy.
correct.
Okay. So why does it? Well, let me not say that. But like, I guess my kind of question revolves around why does and you've explained why helping other people makes you happy. So the question is, why not do everything that makes you happy? In the most simple way, you like to do what makes you happy, whether that's helping other people or not, or doing other things or not. If I understand that correct.
Um, kind of. So like I wouldn't do what makes me most happy because first of all, there's the kind of the skeptic of like, well, maybe I think that that thing will make me happy, but in reality it won't. Um, so there's that of like, will that actually make me the most happy? So like, there's a philosophy of like, let's say you had a ton of chocolate, right? You could eat it and you'd be really happy. Wouldn't be very happy, because like you'd have eaten too much chocolate. So like there's that aspect of it of like the skeptic inside of me of like, okay, well, maybe this won't make me happy. There's the Christian or I guess the I don't want to necessarily call it a Christian but there's the influence of like I do still have some beliefs of like, okay, well that's just wrong. I shouldn't do that. But then there's also the when I'm actually analyzing these situations, it's more so like the things that may make me most happy um, carry a significant amount of risk to cause events that make me unhappy, or they just will cause events that make. So, for example, something that would make me most happy would be potentially, this isn't even really true, but let's say I was super materialist and just having things would make me happy. I could go steal those things, but then the risk associated with doing that would um, would impact me in a way that maybe that's not the right thing. Let's say there's no risk. Say that there's no risk. Well, stealing those things does have a negative consequence, and maybe you don't feel that negative consequence, but maybe other people feel that negative consequence. So, like, let's say you steal a bunch of stuff, and then the company is like, ah, well, don't have it, we're bankrupt, okay? Super extreme example, but let's say those people get laid off. Well, now those people are affecting systems within the country that may cause, let's say, me to pay higher taxes. And then maybe I'll get some happiness out of it, but also, like, maybe I won't. Maybe in the future that will have some negative impact on me.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier as well that there are some things that you just inherently believe are right and wrong. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I
Like what's
was
okay? Go ahead.
yeah, so I was raised in a Christian family. And so I did grow up idea I I'd have to go into this more, but we're going to kind of shelf that for a second. Basically there are some things that I was taught that were right and wrong. And so if you were to ask me about them, I could probably rationalize those things into a more logical foundation. However, if I haven't thought about them, um, then I kind of default to, okay, well, that's right or wrong. Um,
Instinct.
yeah, yeah. So, like, if I haven't thought about them, then I just instinctually think, okay, that I wouldn't even say it's instinctual. I think it's learned. So I think other people taught me those things, and I just kind of I trusted those other people and I accepted it. But so like the stealing example, I personally don't believe on we'll use the word instinct. I don't believe that that's wrong on instinct. I believe that the stealing example could actually have some sort of measurable harm, and I think that that could affect me in a significant way, were I to um, to do it. And then even if it maybe didn't affect me once or twice, the risk associated with me not knowing um, makes me believe that it's not a correct thing to do. So it's not really a right and wrong type of thing, in the sense of like there's good. It's more of a trying to think of another word. So it's like right and wrong in the sense of like I think that's a correct or in. So like, hmm, it's not a good or evil. It's more so a um, I think that it's a correct like judgment call or an incorrect. So like maybe maybe stealing that thing, maybe will not feel any negative consequence at all. Nobody will be affected. Maybe nobody will even know that it's gone. In that situation, maybe I can't think of that big of a reason for like a downside of doing that. However, you never know if people are going to feel that consequence. And maybe, on one hand, take something that's not yours, and then nobody knows that you took it ever. And like it was in their basement, and they never went to their basement for however many years, and then like they died, and the government collected all their stuff anyway. So like maybe that will happen, but also maybe what if you like take it, and then there's the chance that like somebody goes down there looking for it and then some negative consequence happens. So I think that my view of morality is like a mix between I want to um I want to make myself the happiest that I can, which in turn implies making other people happy. And also it's very like risk analysis type of thing. I think the cost of doing certain things that I find, I guess, what we would say is inherently wrong is far too great to ever even consider doing.
Okay. So a lot of atheists and otherwise will kind of explain that their morals are derived from biology or so,
Yeah.
if you're are you kind of familiar with what I'm
Like
saying?
yeah,
Like not
like
necessarily like it's like they'll say like, oh well, it's encoded into my brain with chemicals or whatever, kind of like biological process they might say, or because of psychology, um,
sure.
or due to survival or whatnot. What are your kind of thoughts on that? Do you subscribe to that?
Um
Um, because to me, it kind of sounds like you kind of take the cost benefit analysis approach.
yeah.
Um,
Yep.
but to
It's very
me,
much so.
that kind of sounds like it's rooted, like, where do you get your cost benefit analysis from? What makes something good versus what makes something bad? And you kind of mentioned that, oh, well, this is what I was taught. So I wanted to ask, is that kind of like, uh, generally, would you kind of subscribe to like a psychological root or like a biological root to your morals or
Okay.
something of the sort?
Yeah, sure. So the like evolutionary biology approach to morals of like this is encoded in our brain and we don't kill people because I mean even I guess kind of in a sense maybe I don't know I don't know if I subscribe to that. I think that you can get to that answer without with like a much simpler answer. So I think if I'm correct, which I may be off base, I think one of the things that those people say is like you don't kill people because it's encoded in your brain that if you kill people, um then other people might try and kill you, or you won't have people to help you survive, or you won't have a mate, or something like that, right? Is
So
that
it's kind
something?
of like rooted into like survival in a
Yeah, well,
sense.
I think that's what like the evolutionary biology thing would say is like the whole natural selection thing makes it is a favorable thing. It's a favorable trait to not kill people because then you can pass on your gene effective way. I think that's the view. Um, so um, I think that I don't know if I would necessarily subscribe to that, and I think that that could be pushed way too far to like ridiculous levels. So like
Mm.
again, I don't know how that would justify. I think that that doesn't answer questions. I think that if you have that sort of mindset, it's like again, how do you rationalize not killing somebody if you're never going to see them again and nobody will ever know, right? Like how do you rationalize that as something that and I'm my like ethics and morals are pretty, I wouldn't say they're very like extremely concrete. I'm still kind of like thinking about them and evolving them. So that's where I would say like for those scenarios of like why would I not kill somebody if it would have absolutely negative consequences ever, I still have like a kind of I don't know that like I
Mhm.
do have that upbringing of like you that because it's wrong. However, if I were to rationalize that belief into a into my logical framework, I don't think right now I would be.
So you're giving me contradictory information
What do you mean?
because you're telling me that you um you only will do something if the benefits outweigh the costs.
Correct.
In most cases. Um, and you're saying if I can kill someone and get personal gain from that, and guaranteed under no circumstances receive any kind of negative backlash in any form, I won't do it.
Right. So, like, what I was trying to get at is like, I would say that right now I would not do that. That is something that I wouldn't want to do. However, I would say that that in particular, I have not like I don't know the logic behind that. If I like, I don't know how to do it in that thought experiment. In
Yeah. Now, obviously, it's super hypothetical
Yeah, so in the
because
like my view, what I've thought about is like the practical side of it. Of like again, that's where the whole risk analysis thing comes in. So I don't know if you can even answer that thought experiment um without some sort of higher power or something else. I know that right now I cannot. I think I would have to think about it a lot more. But how I currently structure the cost it's like a cost analysis has a lot to do with like the risk of that thing happening, and then also like I wouldn't want that to happen, I guess is also what kind of plays into that. Actually, I think that's how I would
right.
almost rationalize right now.
But what we're saying is that that would never happen to you, and that you would never have any risk at all. Which in a simple cost benefit analysis means 100% go for it.
Right. So
But there's something telling you that it's still wrong.
right.
So that
So
would be something outside of your risk assessment,
I would say that that
perhaps.
thing, yeah. So I would say that that thing is how I was raised. Like I said, I was raised on a with a Christian like background. Um, and so for that particular, I think that in a practical sense, um, I don't know how useful that thought experiment in like the obviously that scenario. However,
Yeah.
however, if it did happen, I would say that I would have to. That's one of those things that like I do have this kind of logical. framework for it, but I would have to think about it a lot more. I would have to. It's an interesting question of whether or not I rationalized belief of the morals that I was taught, or if those morals that I was taught were already rational in and of themselves, and then I just found the rationality. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say?
Kind of.
Yeah, of like I don't know if I worked backwards, basically. So like I had these beliefs, and some of them I've discarded. I can't think of any um off the top of my head, but I know that there have been some things that I thought were like moral in the past that I do not see as like necessarily a good thing today. I'd still have to think about that a lot more to try and remember it. They're very few. Um but I don't know if I worked backwards or if that like underlying rationality was always there and then I just like discovered it, right?
Yeah, I understand. To me, that underlying, if I was in such a situation, like to me, that underlying conscience is God.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you take out all of what I've ever learned, or if I never learned anything, um, I won't say that. But if I remove my own analyzation of a particular situation, such as killing someone for personal gain, or really just doing anything um, for personal gain, I find that if you remove all of the sort of social constructs or all of the evolutionary kind of like learned behaviors, there's still something that pulls at me, and that's God to me.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
If that kind of makes sense,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, yeah, that
Because
makes
it's still
sense.
there, right? You still question yourself about murdering someone, even if there's guaranteed no backlashes. And although that's kind of difficult to think about practically because that would never really happen, um, in a way you can kind of think about it. And yeah,
So so
it's hard to think of a solid example.
So I would push back on this a little bit.
Hmm.
I think that one way, just thinking about it like off the cuff right now, that I could think about to like rationalize that idea is like, well, maybe you. I guess okay. I guess this depends, but like, let's say you kill somebody and there's no negative consequence, all that yada yada. Um, Knowing that you did that, are we saying that we know that no could ever do that to us, or like that it's only possible for us? Is that the thought experiment?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like imply you given the ability to kill someone does not imply that someone has the ability to kill you.
Okay.
But also, even if it did, um, it kind of is irrelevant because we're not thinking about the thought experiment is purely about what you would do, not what would happen to you.
Well, no,
And
that's
even if
that's
someone
exactly no no
can,
no. That's exactly what we're thinking about.
okay,
Because like yeah.
maybe I misworded that. What I meant to say was, um, just because someone just because someone can kill you, um, in this situation, why is that important? Why is it important? Wh- just because someone can kill you doesn't mean they will, or you will be killed, right? So why does that play a role into your decision making?
Because
Um,
the psychological like knowing that somebody could just kill you and like nobody would know or nothing would happen, like that's kind of bothersome.
and
Um
that deters you, even if there's guaranteed no risk in your situation.
Potentially, yeah. I again like that's just like an off the cuff. If the
Yeah,
situation, yeah, if the scenario were not like, um, if the scenario were just no risk in the sense of nothing immediate, like nothing would happen to you, but other people could do it, then yeah, I would say that would be my assessment. Um, so I'd have to think about that more. I'd have to think about in the scenario where, like, let's say you're the only person on the entire earth that can kill somebody with zero negative consequences. Um, why you wouldn't do that? We'll have to shelve that. I'll have to think about that a lot more.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that um honestly, if I'm being like consistent, it may end up being that like maybe I don't think that's wrong. But that would be like, I don't know if that's just a possibility. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I do think it's wrong, but like I'd have to think about it of why.
About why
Uh,
you think it's wrong.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm at, where I'm kind of like maybe I'm working backwards of like I have all these views already, and then I'm trying to fit them into a framework that makes them all consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Um.
go ahead.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So like on that topic, like the reason that I would say like want to do that is so that if a scenario comes up where you don't necessarily know the right answer, have a consistent frame of how to determine what's wrong or incorrect or correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, that was a good one. Okay.
kind
Um.
kind of just like, because I know a lot of, just going back to like how a lot of people think it has to do with psychology or chemistry. A lot of people kind of subscribe to that too, right? Where they say, oh, my morals come from the fact that, you know, organisms do its best for their survival, and whatnot, and the chemical processes in your brain are what are your conscience. Um, and then in that case, it's just kind of like, I don't know. I don't know if you how much you've thought about that, but to me, I just wanted to touch on this because I think a lot of those, if, like, let's say, if your thoughts about what's right and wrong come from purely 100% from the chemicals in your brain and from evolutionary processes, then that would mean that all of your thoughts
mm.
come from chemicals in your brain and evolutionary processes, including the thought that all of your thoughts come from chemistry and evolutionary processes. And to me, that's circular reasoning. Um, so that's kind of one reason why I don't really subscribe to. I'm not saying people don't have morals, but like justifying their morals. Why I kind of disagree um, with the idea that it comes from like learned behaviors. Now, I'm not saying learned behaviors aren't a thing. That's well documented in psychology. But I think like the root, the source of where morals come from, has to go beyond that.
Sure. So I think if you were to accept that, what you were saying is maybe it's not even circular reasoning, but you'd have to accept like a very deterministic like view of the world of like the things that you end up doing are predetermined because if you're going to make a this argument actually I don't like believe it, but like I've had the argument with my old philosophy teacher, and like I still don't know a logical like um way around this of like okay, you do have some um you have your chemical processes and these all follow some laws, and that means that if you do something or if you set the system in like a certain state, then there is a predetermined state. um I think that you can I think that touches on the idea of consciousness and like what actually is consciousness. um so I'm not exactly um not exactly sure. I don't know if I believe that, but yeah, I think that I don't know the argument against that in a non
Hmm.
like faith based perspective.
Okay.
Yeah. But personally, I believe that argument is dumb. I don't like to think that my life is determined. So I mean that may just be like the kind of emotional like I want to feel good about the things that I do. Um, I
No,
yeah, but
no, I don't believe life is determined either. I think we all have free will, right?
yeah, yeah. Well,
Um,
that's I think what you're getting at. Life isn't.
yeah,
Okay.
we're not just robots that are programmed to react in various ways.
Right.
I don't believe that.
So with the free will thing,
Hmm.
so did you lay out like your view of free will within the framework of your faith?
Yeah. So, um, and a lot of people will say, you know, if God is all knowing, right? He knows the past, present, and the future. How do we have free will? Because he knows the future. Therefore, our future is like determined, I guess. Um, and I won't say I have a great answer. That's kind of like the big question of with free will, right? Do we have it? If we do, how so? And to me, I don't have a full answer because it's still, I don't think we're meant to understand it completely, perhaps. But kind of the way I think about it is like this. So I do think we have free will, and I also think that God is all knowing and omniscient. Um, because and this also kind of ties to like origins, right? So, um, if would you agree that the Big Bang um, signifies the beginning of space and time and matter?
Um, I'm a little shifty on that one. I'm gonna have to say I don't know because there are some
Okay.
theories of how like it just loops and then the Big Bang is just the beginning of our existence, but not
Hmm.
necessarily existence as a whole. I don't.
Okay.
I think that falls into the purview of like those are questions I can't answer.
Okay. Well, I won't dive in on that right at this moment, but basically, the idea is that since God exists outside of time, he's able to see our future, but that does not actually impede on our free will. And it's I don't I'll admit I can't explain that to you. I really don't understand that, but I also don't understand what it's like. I live in a time bound universe. We all do. So I don't think any of us could really explain that. But that's kind of the general consensus that I've heard is that we have free will. God is omniscient. He knows what will happen before we're born and after we die. But he still gives us free will, um, and that's not impeded on us because he exists outside of our time bound universe, if that kind of makes sense.
Right. So
The,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like the intricacies on that, I'm not familiar with, and I'm sure there are some people that have, thought about it a lot more than I have. That could probably explain it. Um,
Wow. Wow. I don't know
but
about that. I still haven't gotten an answer to this question.
I know,
But
and well, I don't think that's like another thing too. Like maybe, I mean, maybe it's just something we're meant to accept, or maybe it's just something we're not gonna get an answer to. Because like till we die, we're stuck in a time bound universe,
right.
unless something weird happens and we like jump through a black hole and end up somewhere else or what. Never mind. Um, but
Sure.
that's kind
So
of my perspective on like justifying it. But like the important part is that I believe there's free will, um, because that's without free will, we wouldn't be able to um, love, and therefore we would not be able to get to heaven.
sure.
Okay.
Um okay. So then that kind of jumps into the topic of like this is a complicated one. This kind of jumps into
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
topic of like I guess why do bad things happen?
Hmm.
Um so like I think I've actually had this conversation around you or with you. Like the biggest thing, the biggest qualm I've ever had with religion is like I just I can't wrap my head around like, and I can't just accept it because it's like bad things happening, right? So like it's like very unsettling to just accept of like why not even necessarily why do bad things happen to good people, but like just in general, like why do these things happen? Um, I guess I would like to hear your take on that.
Yeah. Um, it's a very, very hard question. And the truth is, it's something I struggle with a lot too. Um, is I don't know. I agree. It's really hard to answer. And what I kind of think about it is that if we have free will, we have the ability to create bad as mankind, right? Um, we have the choice of doing good or bad. Um, and I know this is one facet of it, and I'll kind of address the other, which would be what about things that are outside of man's control? I'll address that momentarily, but because we have free will, um, we have the ability to make bad choices, and people make bad choices because it benefits them. We discussed that earlier, right? And not all people will do that, of course, but people make bad choices, and I think that God can take a bad thing and turn it into a good thing. Um, but the truth is, bad things happen because people choose to go their own way, and they choose to do things that will benefit them. Typically, not doing what the Lord, I guess you could say, like, what would Jesus do? But um, yeah, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah,
Did I kind of
so
explain that
okay,
well?
so this kind of loops into like, do you think that um there's a separation between like animals and humans and like other life forms within this framework, or are humans like a separate thing?
I thought about that too because, well, we are definitely the most intelligent beings on the planet that we've met so far. Um, and in the Bible, it says that we're given dominion over all other things, all other material things in the universe. Well, really just in the world, but I guess in the universe, right? So that would imply maybe that like a dog couldn't be a Christian. Um, I don't know. I really don't know. Because I always thought too, like, I wonder if there's an alien planet somewhere out there that we haven't discovered yet, where they are also, sentient. Of course, everybody's thought about this. Um, and it's like, well, I wonder if they too could be Christian, and maybe they have a Bible of their own. Um, or, you know,
Yeah,
um,
I've
and it's
actually
like,
thought about
I
that.
wonder if we're the only people selected by God or created by God to be, like with Him. Um, I don't think that other organisms have I guess you could say like a soul would be a way to say it. I would say that non-human organisms probably are not selected by God. So, they're not going to go to Judgment Day. I would not expect a dog to have a conscience beyond evolutionary and psychological things. So I think humans are different in that regard, but the truth is, I really don't know.
Okay.
uh, maybe, I mean, maybe God calls out to dogs and cats too, and they're just not able to communicate that with us. Or maybe not. I don't know.
Right, so this kind of like plays into the, so like bad things can happen. You already mentioned like natural disasters and stuff like that, but like the bad things can happen from like, let's say you're walking on a trail and like a mountain lion just mauls you, right? Like,
Sure.
so you have both those types of like natural occurrences of things that are outside the framework of like a conscious human being like, this will benefit me if I kill this person and take his riches. So like
Hmm.
um or disease is like the big, that's the one for me. I mean,
Yeah.
as you know, yeah, like
Hmm.
living with something that's completely out of my control. That's like, I was already kind of I'll talk about this later, but yeah, that type of thing is kind of like, how do we, in a faith framework, I don't personally see how we rectify those things, at least with the Christian all loving God. I think I'm still like searching for an answer for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something too I've wrestled with. I remember maybe, I don't know, in my childhood, I would always think, I've got a pollen allergy, and I know that's like, oh, crazy. Go donate on my GoFundMe. Uh, but like, I always thought, like, why did God make allergies? There's no benefit. There's nothing to learn from having allergies, especially like small allergies. Um, there's nothing, if you get stung by a bee and get hives, like you don't learn anything from that. It's not a learning opportunity. It just makes your arm hurt.
Yeah.
And for some people, obviously, it's really bad. So it's like that's something I've always wrestled with, you know, and um, I would say I think that like just the way the universe is set up and the way this world kind of came to be, um, some things can inherently have positive and negative effects, like diseases, like natural disasters. And I don't want to get into like the butterfly effect of like how the Industrial Revolution makes natural disasters or whatever, because I don't even know about that. But you know, most people would say a hurricane is out of our control, so we'll just go with that.
Sure.
But um, I I I struggle with understanding why stuff like that happens too. I know that God gives us tests to test our faith. And I think that can kind of be manifested in like a disease, for example, um, where
I failed them.
I don't know, but um, that's kind of like where I guess I kind of see it maybe is where things that are out of our control. Like I said, I think that God plays in a very, very active role in this universe and this world. Um, and that's kind of how I sort of eh, justify or maybe cope with that idea is that I know God gives us tests, and maybe that test is through becoming ill or getting a disease. Um, Beyond that, maybe just the way the world is set up, the way physics and chemistry and biology works, it's just going to happen. And maybe I don't want to say it's a side effect because I don't think God had any unintended side effects. I think he knows about everything he made. Um, so I really don't know. I mean, that's really the best I can do to answer that question. That's just really something that I would have to ask God about.
Okay. Yeah, that's for me, that's like the biggest thing that I've ever struggled with, of like, even before I had my own personal experience. I thought about that a lot, of like, I guess the maxim, I don't even think maxim is the correct word, but like, why do good things happen to bad people and why do bad things happen to good?
Yeah.
That's always been something that I've kind of like not understood, and so I've been searching for that answer from multiple different people, and it just um seems like faith even through faith answering like um some unanswerable questions, there are still some lingering unanswerable questions. um yeah.
Yeah. One sec.
Somebody might have walked in. What happens?
Hey, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Got a knock on my door.
Okay. Okay, so I guess when we say, okay, you said tests, like, does this, what do you mean by when you say test? Like, would these be, do these have like implications for like an afterlife, or what are your views on the afterlife and how things that we do in this current life affect that?
Sorry, say again.
I guess the question, no problem. The question is basically like, um, what are your views on an afterlife, and what are your views on how the things that we do in our current life affect the outcome of the afterlife?
Yeah, so, and that's kind of another thing too, because I know you mentioned before that um, a lot of people will say that, well, let me backtrack. So I know there's a lot of people who kind of subscribe to the idea that, like, you know, you got to do good in your life if you want a good afterlife. I know that's a big thing in Buddhism, is that um, your next life is determined on your actions in your current life. So if you are a good person in your current life, you'll be rewarded in your next life with a higher rank in society or whatnot. And then vice versa, if you're a bad person, your next life is gonna be worse off for you as punishment. Um, and there some Christian denominations and beliefs will kind of also agree that, like, um, you should do good. Well, and also, you should do good, but there's kind of an idea that um, Christian salvation comes from good works, and I don't think that's true. Um, I don't think you're required by any means to do a certain amount beyond believing that Jesus died on the cross. Um, and that's kind of like, and then of course that begs the question, well, um, can I, you know, be saved and then just go about my life and sin and whatnot? And then, but I was saved, and Jesus paid for my debts, so I'm good to go to heaven, um, even though I was just kind of sinning my entire life. Um, is that kind of like where you're kind of leading with this question?
Actually, no, I wasn't trying.
Okay,
Yeah, I
I
wasn't
think I
trying to go there.
misinterpreted you.
I mean that I kind of thought about that as you were speaking, but no, when I actually asked the question, that's not where I was trying to go. But
My bad.
it's where I was going to go, but it's not where I
Okay.
originally. Yeah, it's not where I originally was going. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess the idea is like the so before that actually there's I think a more interesting thought of like you said that like necessarily doing good things is not a requisite, right?
hmm
So I think that I think this contradicts some things. I think that saying this from what I've heard from you past is like I'm a little confused. So okay, wouldn't hmm, would having that relationship with God or Jesus actually cause you to do those good things though? Like, wouldn't that be kind of almost not like doing the good things isn't necessarily the thing that happens, but if like they're almost interlinked of like if you do these things and you believe in God, like if you believe in God, then you're probably going to end up doing these things, or is that not something you believe?
Yeah. So what I believe is that um, when you are saved, you're kind of like invited into the family of God, right? And the family of God is a perfect family. Therefore, as a family member, I should try to be as close as I can to that. Um, so that's kind of like why that, and the fact that God gives me my morals. Um, that's kind of like why I would justify doing good works. Um, and I mean, yeah, they're not. I would say it's not a requirement for salvation, but the reason that we still do it is because we have the responsibility of being a family member of the Lord, um, which kind of implies like this is how you should live your life.
Right. Okay. Hmm.
Which I know is kind of weird because I don't know, it can be kind of hard to explain. I think the kind of contradictory part, if I'm not mistaken, would be like, well, if it's not a requirement, then therefore what you're saying is that I can be saved by Jesus, then not ever think about it again, and then when I die, I'll just go to heaven.
Right.
Um,
Well, or the whole like, as long as on my deathbed I accept Jesus into my heart and blah blah blah, then I'll go to heaven. Yeah.
mhm. So the and to me, I would say it's hard to say. Um, I was just In fact, okay, I'll mention this. So I'm reading a book in the Bible about. Oh, sorry, Brandon just texted me. What up? Um, I'm reading a book in the Bible. Let me see if I can find it. Daniel, I believe. Yeah. So the book of the Bible, Daniel is all about this guy, obviously named Daniel, and who works alongside a bunch of kings. And the idea is that Daniel has all these visions in the book on what's going to happen. The kings all have these dreams that they don't understand, and Daniel, through God, is able to interpret their dreams, and they always come true. Anyways, in the book, there's two kings. One's name is Nebuchadnezzar. I don't remember the other guy's name, but King Nebuchadnezzar kind of goes through his life not knowing God. He's sinning, but he doesn't know God. And Daniel kind of interprets his dream that he has. And at some point, it says, like Nebuchadnezzar realizes, like, oh, you know, I didn't realize I was thinking that I could be God. There's a God above me. I'm going to start worshiping him. And then the idea is that Nebuchadnezzar is all good because he's sort of like changed his ways. Um, he didn't know beforehand necessarily. So when he learns, like, hey, God is good, we need to do that. Then he kind of like almost like he's not like reborn, but I mean, I guess you could say that. He sort of like pivots, does a 180, and he's good. He becomes a better king. And there's way more to that story that I don't want to unpack. That's kind of like a very, very, very general synopsis. And there's another king who I believe was the descendants of Nebuchadnezzar, saw what he did and going through that transformation, but he decides that I've seen God. I've seen what it does to my dad or whoever it was, grandpa, whatever. I'm not gonna. I'm still gonna do my own thing. I know who God is, but I'm gonna do my own. I'm gonna go my own way, anyways, in spite of what God says. And then he gets mega punished, basically. So the idea of if I accept Jesus on my deathbed, I will probably go to heaven, I would agree with, especially if, I mean, on the deathbed is kind of like cliche, I guess. I know it happens, but I think that at any time when someone believes, any time in someone's life, if they truly believe in their heart that Jesus died on the cross and paid for their sins, um, that they are saved and the details can be worked out between them and God. Um, like if you're on your deathbed and you lived a life of sin, but in your dying breath, you accept Jesus into your heart, and then you just, you're dead, you're gone. Then it's like, I don't really know how that conversation is going to go between you and God. Um, I think really what it comes down to, and then you have another scenario where someone accepts God, truly believes it, but they stray away and they start doing their own thing. And they've accepted God, but they're not really um, following. I guess you could say they're not really like an active in their faith. Um, and where was I going with this? To me, I would argue that if someone who accepts Jesus but continues to do their own thing. I think when you accept Jesus and you are saved, you're kind of held to a higher responsibility because now I don't know what God thinks about this necessarily, but I would say if you don't know that something is wrong, or if you don't know that something is considered a sin, then you aren't necessarily held accountable for it, which is I think you would agree with, right? Like, you know, if there's a bowl of candy on the table and I grab a piece of candy and I eat it and I didn't realize I was supposed to pay for it, I don't think I would necessarily get in trouble because I didn't know, and that's the honest truth. But if you know, and this is like kind of a childish example, but um, if you do know and you steal knowingly, then that's kind of different.
Yeah,
And
it
I would
carries a
say that
different
you would,
weight. Yeah.
yeah. And it's kind of the same idea when it comes to Christianity. If you are saved, um, congratulations, you're held to a higher response. You're now going to be held to a higher bar on how you should live your life.